We're recording the interview of George Silvis. This interview is being conducted by Cameron Barberry from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. The interview is being recorded at Wright State. It is currently 3:55 p.m., 7 September 2017. All right, George, where are you from? Where were you born?
Oil City, Pennsylvania.
How was that growing up?
I loved it. It was out in the country. We lived out in the country and stuff, and we had a lot of fun.
Did you have your parents? What did they do?
Dad was in the Navy during World War II, and he worked at J&L Steel, and my mom was a homemaker. Scouts and church and everything else. So,
Did you have any siblings?
yep, I have had two brothers and two sisters. And since then, my one sister died of cancer, and my youngest brother died of a heart attack.
Oh, goodness. Now, I know your father was in World War II. Any other siblings or family members that were in the military?
My brother was in the Army, and he was in Vietnam. He was on a base inside of a base 40 miles from DMZ. He was a courier, and anytime they left, they flew in choppers. He told me, he said when they got on the choppers, they cuffed anything they were carrying to the chopper. Because if it went down, they had almost so much time to get out of the chopper.
Goodness. Now, what did you do before your service?
What did I do? I graduated high school.
So
I
you
went out of high school, right into service.
And you chose to enlist instead of being drafted?
Yep.
And so what was that experience going in through the process to be in
It
the
was a
military?
big exchange. Well, not so much for us from my school, because our high school coach was an ex-Marine. Well, I shouldn't say ex, he was a Marine. You're never an ex-Marine. And he was a Marine, and he drilled us continuously, marching and everything else, and so we knew what we were getting into when we went. So
And so arriving at basic.
it was a little bit of a change, but yet, like I said, we went through what he was doing, we got it more intense. So, and I had no regrets of going. So.
And so what was that experience like? I know you said you went had the experience through high school, but the experience of actually leaving home, and now you're in basic.
That was, I think, the hardest thing. It was the first time away from home. Some of the guys took it real hard. I know there was a couple guys crying at night when we were there. Me, it was hard, but I knew I had chosen to do this. I had made up my own mind to go, so it was no one else's, and so I enjoyed it.
And then, did you pick your job for the military?
That's a good one. Went in and we signed up. I put aircraft maintenance, aircraft engine, and small arms. Okay. I got weapons mechanic. I loaded everything from nuclear weapons to 500, 700, 1,000-pound bombs and toilet paper bombs, is what we called in Okinawa. All they were is the pamphlet bombs. So, and I also, when we were up in Kinchlow, we had a thing up there where they had an experiment going on with the 52s with 2.75 rockets on, which they canceled after they lost a rocket pod over Kansas. We went out to de-arm, and the team chief and I went out. We started on the co-pilot side, de-armed the rocket pod between the inboard and outboard engine, went and de-armed the GAM missile underneath, de-armed the GAM missile, and walked to the end of the wing. Realized we forgot something. Went back, and there was nothing there, and things picked up in a hurry.
And this is right out of basic?
Yep.
So this is through your tech
Well, I
school?
went to tech school in Denver, Colorado. It's called Black Shack, I think it was. And we learned how to load bombs and stuff on the B-52s and stuff, bomb maintenance, bomb shacks, racks, and everything new to do with bombs, too.
And what year was this and what month? Did you, I guess,
68, I graduated, and that was I went to basic in July. Spent end of August, 1st of September, roughly.
Okay.
And I went there and we there. And then after that, we went to our first base. And I spent a year in Michigan, loading nukes.
And what base was that?
Kinchlow Air Force Base, which is now a housing area and a penitentiary.
Goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your experience going through basic and all that stuff, how was it? Now you're at your first duty station.
That was a change too, because there's there's new people, new rules, new regulations. You had to learn things that you'd done different one way in the civilian life you couldn't do. You had responsibilities. You couldn't just go out and do whatever you wanted. Most of us did, and hope we never got caught. But
So your first duty station, how long was it before you were deployed from your first duty station?
What do you mean?
Your first deployment?
Oh, I was there just about a year. I got up there in January, and I left in December. Went home for a month, and then I went to Okinawa for supposed to have been for 18 months, and it turned out to be 9.5 months. And then I went to was shipped to Utapao, Thailand for another 10.5 months, and that was a big culture change for either base.
And that was in Japan was considered a deployment.
Yeah.
What was it like the experience? I guess first getting into a new country.
The first thing I noticed, like I said, I left in December in Michigan, 125 inches of snow. And I'm going, and you're talking 20 below at times, or 40 below, when the wind chill or more. And you go to Okinawa, here's everybody running around with field coats on, shivering, and I'm running around in t-shirts and shorts, sweating my you-know-what off. And I'm saying, you guys are pulling my leg. Nope, you wait a year. Well, 9.5 months later, I was one of the guys when temperature started to drop down a little bit. I was running around in a field jacket too. And then the culture shock was different too. It's, there was things, I don't know how I want to word it. The people were a lot different. Some of them were as friendly as you want, and you got along with them good and everything else. I joined a motorcycle club on Okinawa called Ashira's Rough Riders. I bought a motorcycle and got a license through the base to drive, and we used to go what they call benju hopping. We used to go out and all through all these trails and stuff. And one of the first rides we were on, we come up and we stopped before we went out across the field, and they said, here's a path about 1.5 feet wide. And they said, do not get off this path. Stay right on this path. Okay. We went, we rode for about an hour up on top of one of the mountains, and we took a rest. And I said, why weren't we allowed to get off that path? We couldn't pass somebody. They said, because it's still an active minefield. No. And that's, people are living with it over there. And, there's different, like they had a snake over there called a habu. It would actually chase a human being. It was not afraid of him. It was a black snake and deadly poison. And you seen one of them, you hope it didn't see you because you wanted to get away from it.
And so that's what you guys did on your downtime. What would you do?
We had downtown, and we went to, 21 years old. You know what guys are going to do at 21 years old. I'm going to be nice, and that's all I'm going to say. You're off base. You're hitting the bars. So, okay? Because I don't know who's all going to see this.
So when you were stationed in Japan, what was your duty days like?
When I was on, we worked 6 days on, 2 days off. 12-hour shifts, you swing shifts. You work your first 6 on, you get, say, 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock at night. When you change shift, it was 6 o'clock at night to 6 o'clock in the morning. So basic duty day, you get up, go get breakfast and stuff, and get around, do whatever chores you had, mail call, and check, get your check and put it in the bank, go downtown and go around, different things down there, and come back, get ready to go to work, and you usually got maybe 5-6 hours of sleep before you went back to work. So you're 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And you get into the rut. So, and I'd do it tomorrow if I could.
And you guys were able to keep in contact with home?
Oh yeah, we you could call from home, get on the Mars line if you wanted to, and they didn't have cell phones and stuff like they do now. You know, internet and stuff. Back in '69, so and yeah, mail every day, or at least twice a week, 3 times a week, and I'd say every day, but no, I got letters from them about 3 or 4 times a week, and from my ex-girlfriend. I was engaged before I went over, and we separated when I went over, and we still kept in contact and stuff. So.
Now you said you went straight from Japan to.
Yep, I had orders to go to Thailand. They came down with a dream sheet. They said, we're sending people home, and I put all SAC bases here in the States. And instead of coming east, I went west. I went to Thailand. And I stopped in, my orders had me stop in Da Nang, then Bangkok, and out of Bangkok into Utapao, Thailand. And I was there for 10.5 months before I came.
And what was the experience like? I know you said you were in Japan. What was the experience like going from...
The biggest experience is when you hopped off of that C-140, C-130, is the smell on Thailand. Or Utah there, it was the tapioca plant, and that was the biggest thing that hit you is the smell and the heat. It just, as soon as you stepped out there, it was like stepping into a furnace. Even from Okinawa to Thailand, it was the heat and the smell is the biggest change. And the people, they call it the land of smiles for a reason. Everybody's smiling over there. Everybody was friendly as all get out. Now there was some you had trouble with, but 90% of the time it's generally your own fault for starting the trouble. So, and again, off base, the same thing. So,
and so that was off base. Now, what did you guys do for rec? And
on rec base, we had the USO building, and they had a library and stuff there. I used to build airplanes, control line airplanes. We used to fly them at the baseball field. Because no one played baseball there. We had a field, but no one never seen anybody play any games. And then they had a big slot car set, and I built, I don't know, 6 slot cars from scratch up, and used to go over there and race that and stuff. But a lot of fun.
Now, what was the job that you started doing and as soon as you got down here?
Okay, I was loading bomb. What do you mean? Over in Thailand, my job? Or?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When I was in Okinawa, I was what they called a 3-man. I walked a bomb from the trailer over, put it up in the bays or the Murrex, or not Murrex, but Murrex. And my job in Thailand, I went from being a 3-man to being a 4-man. I rolled the bombs down off on the trailer. They had arms on. You rolled them down, position them, put a strap on, and you put a bomb shack on, and they made sure the fuse wires, arming wires and stuff were in right and fast and ready to go. And then they came and picked it up with a jammer and took it over to the base.
And so you guys loaded up for the jammer.
We went from an Okinawa, we call what they do is, it was a 1-by-1 load. You loaded each bomb by itself. In Thailand, they loaded the MIR racks 1-by-1, but inside were preloaded racks that we loaded and preloaded. We had stands out there. The bomb dump would come in with trailers and drop them with the bombs on, and we prep the bombs there and roll them down, and then they'd hang them on the MIR racks, not MIR racks, but the internal racks to go into the bay. 12-hour shifts.
12-hour shifts. So the job, did it feel different from your
just the heat?
Japan? Just the heat.
Just the heat.
Now, was there anything that happened while you were there, any conflict-wise, on base?
Nah, it happened after we left. They had snipers come in. From shortly after I left, there were snipers came in, tried to destroy a 52. They did get one satchel charge thrown in the engine bay, or engine nucleus, and they were all killed either by snakes or the MPs.
And so, that being said, I mean, did you have any experiences there that stood out?
Oh, I've had a couple experience. You mean loading bombs and stuff?
with your
Okay.
deployment.
Okay, let's go back to Okinawa. One of the last few birds we were loading there before I was supposed to be discharged, or not discharged, but sent to Unipal. We were loading an external unit, Murax, outboard around top, and we didn't load the low racks what they have now. These were right up against the wing. Team chief was on an 8-foot ladder and I was on a 6-foot ladder. Jammer came in, brought it up. He was in with about 2 inches of locking her in, or closer, and he just went to move another inch or two to lock it in, and there was a pothole. The jammer lunged ahead. If the team chief wouldn't have had a hold of the nose fuse and I had a hold of the tail, it had jumped up and rolled right down and got our 3-man run the jammer. He backed out. We tried it again. Finally, we actually locked it in by hand. I pulled down the tail, and he pushed up in the nose, and then I slammed mine up. We got it loaded in. So. And then I had a motorcycle accident in Okinawa. That's how I got the scar. There was an accident, and I came up, and I had a choice of either laying it down and going under the car, or going around and dropping off her side, or go around the other way and hope they didn't turn in. I locked her up and went straight into the back of the car. And I bent my forks back 1 inch. I hit it square. And the only other damage to my thing is my tanks. I had both dents on both sides of my legs, where my legs were. And I had this, and they tried a new painkiller. I went to the Air Force, the hospital in Kadena, and they had just had a commercial airline come in that hit an air pocket. So I was bumped to go down the road to an Army hospital, and they came in, put 5 shots in. It was dead, and he came back in, and it wasn't dead. He did it dead about 4 times, and finally he sewed it up. And it wasn't dead when he finished sewing. And then on Utapile, last week I was there, and when you had 1 week left, you were supposed to be what they called tractor ass. You drove a tractor around hauling empty bays. You'd take them into the preload area. They ring them out. They rang out good. You take them out to the preload bays, and they'd hang them. And then you go back, get more empty racks, and do the same thing. Well, they had a big push on, and they threw a bunch of us guys together to make a team. I was rolling the bombs again, and the jammer driver that was driving had a habit that if the table turned on the jammer, he would go back up against the bomb and then back out. Well, when he did, he went up just a tad too high, and there's 2 locks that snap out to hold the bomb shackle down into the bay. They didn't snap out, so the bomb left it raised up a little bit, and it turned. And when he backed out, the shackle was in the groove, but it wasn't locked in, and it went probably about that far, maybe a little bit more, nose first. And it was supposed to have like a fuse about this long. We had about that much. Picked it up, put it in the jammer, and as he's taking it back to put it on the rack, the trailer, I'm there screwing the nose fuse, what's left of the nose fuse out to get the delay element out. And I got it out and everything. I was getting ready to flip it up over the revetment, and I heard this do that. Here's the guy from the bomb dump come in to pick up empty trailers. He had seen it, and he is white as a sheet. He said, "I'll take care of it." He come back about 30 minutes later, and he says, "All I could get is the plug." He couldn't find another nose fuse, so we did that.
The munition ended up going off? Or?
No. I wouldn't be here.
Well, no, I'm talking about after he had taken care of it, did they have to
well, once I took the delay element out, the booster charge can't go off. It takes the delay element, and that can be anywhere from up to 5 minutes or longer, and it can be down to 30 seconds. So we didn't know what they were, and being young and foolish, we were lucky.
And I know you talked about being the short term or the short time with your week left. How was that experience, knowing that you're about to go home?
I was relieved. I was ready to go home. Spent 19 months away from everything, and I was ready to go back to the States. But then I did turn around and volunteered to stay another year, and they refused me. So.
And so, walk me through your time coming back home. Your
Well, we left Okinawa, or we left Thailand. We flew into Tonsanut and picked up a emergency leave person. Landed in Okinawa and to refuel and get a new flight crew. And when we boarded the airplane back up, we went out to taxi out. Next thing you know, we're taxied back in. We did that two more times. The second time we came in, there was a guy up on the wing and had a panel open. And I yelled up at him. I said, "Get a bigger hammer." And one of the guys, when we went up inside, said he must have heard you. He's beating on something. And after we took off, the pilot come on and said, "Well, we were having compass troubles." Now, I don't know that much about compasses in airplanes, but I don't think they're out on the wing. And I don't think you'd be beating on us with a hammer. And we hit Hawaii, and we were there, got back on, and it was the same flight crew again because they wasn't new, and he wanted to get us home. Landed in California, and I switched out of my military uniforms because that's what we were told. And met a couple Army guys, and they asked me where I was at. I told them Utah Pile in Okinawa loading 52s for Nam. He said, "Come with me." We went to the bar in the airport, and they were buying me drinks because they said they don't know how many times they called 52s in for strikes right on their thing. And then they got on a plane. I got on a plane and headed home. Almost fell asleep going into Chicago. As a matter of fact, I did. I thought we were taking off. And I was supposed to change planes in Chicago. Got home, and no one knew I was coming home. I called a taxi at the local airport, and they took me home. And I was sitting on the front porch when my mom and dad and my younger sister came home.
And what was that experience like, seeing them for the first time?
It was great. Excuse me. It's just thinking about my younger sister. She just passed away about 2 years ago with cancer. And every time I think of it, I can't stand it. Sorry about that.
No, no.
I shouldn't have brought that up. But I spent 6 months there, or not 6 months, I spent 30 days there. And then I went to Wichita, Kansas, which was a 105 training base, attack training base for fighter pilots. And I landed there and went in and checked in and stuff. And the first sergeant took me over to show me what I was working on. And he said, "This is what you're going to be working on." I looked at the 105 and I said, "Well, where's the 52 you want me to put this in?" I said, "I don't know anything about fighters." I said, "I can load this, try and load it in a 52 if you want me to," but I said, "I don't know anything about it." He said, "No, according to your records, you did real well on your testing on the Gatling gun when you were in tech school." He says, "You're going to gun shop." So I worked on that gun and stuff. Had a lot of fun with some of the pilots. I had one pilot I got torqued off. One of the officers out there, him and I met him down. We were off base drinking, and he came over. I didn't know he was an officer at the time. He says, do you mind if I sat down? I said, no, sir, go ahead. We were talking, and then he asked me to go to this other club. I said, well, I'm not a member. It's a private club. He said, come on, I'm a member. So we went over there, and we were drinking and stuff, and I said, can you drop me off at a friend's house? He said, why? And I said, well, I think I've had too much to go driving back on base. Yeah, I'll take you on. And we came up there, and he dimmed his lights, and the guy saluted him, and it didn't sink in. You know, took me up, dropped me off at barracks. Well, next morning I caught a ride down and got my car and went to work, and I'm out there on 105 on the B4 stand with the bay open on the gun, and I heard this, hey George, how's it going? How's your head? And I turned around, and there he was, and I realized he was the colonel. And I snapped him a salute. Pretty sure it goes, sir. And I said, I hope I didn't say anything last night I shouldn't have. But we got joking around. I actually one time took a 20 millimeter dud. It was just weight. It was all aluminum. Painted up a HEI. And I knew he was out flying. He came back. I went up and de-armed his gun. I said, sir, were you supposed to have HEI on? He says, no. I turned around, dropped it, and he caught it. And I told him, I said, it's just a dummy round painted up. And he borrowed it. About 2 hours later, I get called into my commander's office. And he says, George, what are you doing with HEIs? I said, nothing. He said, well, I just got a thing from debrief that the colonel brought a round in. And I said, it's a dummy round painted as HE. He said, well, you get it back, you get rid of it, and don't do it again. Well, one of the pilots found out who did it. And he took off, and I was sitting in the commander's office a couple weeks later. And they called down and said, the pilot called the control tower and said I drove across the runway in front of him. And the commander's sitting there, looks at me, looks at the first sergeant. He said, how long has George been here? Oh, about an hour. Why? He went back on the phone. He said, I'm afraid it wasn't him. He's been here for over an hour in my office talking to me. So the colonel asked, I talked to the colonel later, and I told him what happened. He said, I know who it was. I'll take care of him. He had orders for Vietnam. According to the colonel, he was going to see him send them on. I said,
So how long was your career?
Just 4 years.
Just 4 years?
I'd have probably stayed in, but in 4 years they screwed me over 4 times. I had my, when SAC at the time, you got promoted quick. And in 4 years I was staff sergeant. And they held my staff sergeant like 6 months. And because of, they wouldn't give me a reason, but they said, I know there was guys with less rank, less time in service than me, and lower grades that got their stripe ahead of me. And a couple other things, you know, like I said, I put in all stateside bases. I want to come home, and they sent me to Southeast Asia. And I said, that's it, I was getting out. And they tried everything to get me to stay in. No.
And so what did you do directly after the military?
I went home. The first job I had when I got home was called American Safety Razor out of Shippensville. We were making disposable razors and scalpels and stuff, and most of the stuff was being sent to Vietnam. And I ran fork truck there, and the unit that sanitized everything. And I worked there for about 3 months, and J&L, I got a call from J&L that I have an appointment for a briefing. I went in there and I started working with J&L. I worked with them for 5.5, I think it was 5.5 to 6 years. And then they were bought out by a lawyer in New York who bought Van Huffel plant in Ohio here. And we were open about another 5 years after that, and he declared bankruptcy, and he shut our plant down first. We had 125. They had over 600, I guess. They shut us down, and they shut them down about 2 months later. And then I bounced around. I went and ran with community ambulance for a while. I ran with volunteer fire department. I was advanced rescue, pump maintenance, and because it was just a small department. And then Bill Weber bought the old J&L Van Huffel plant and fired it back up, and I went back to work there. And I worked there for 5 years until I was forced into retirement.
So what was the experience going from military to civilian life?
It wasn't hard because to me, I think the military life prepared me for work in the civilian, because you learned that there's certain orders of things you had to do. There's shortcuts, and everybody takes them, that you can't take for safety reasons. And then there's other shortcuts you can take that are, you get the job done quicker and just as efficient, but it doesn't take as long. And I think that's part of what the service, brought to me, is because you had to think on your own. You weren't, it's not like this is the way you're going to do it. Well, it wasn't for me in the service when I was in. Because basically, especially in Thailand and Okinawa, we had the flights we had to get out. They say, okay, here's your TOs, this is what you're supposed to follow. And as long as everything was done safely, you could reload that bird in an hour and a half. But if you couldn't and it took you 2 hours, well, that was fine too. They weren't happy about it, but it was fine. So it just, you got proficient at your job. That's one of the things I think the service helped me, is getting proficient at my jobs and stuff I wanted to do.
I'm actually just going through here. We
getting ahead of you?
Oh no, you're actually fine. They have this sheet, and I actually go a little bit out of order just because we talk about things and they cover certain things. And so, how did your wartime experience? How did that affect your life?
It gave me a different perspective. I can't even pronounce it now. Tongue-tied. I have trouble at times pronouncing words. A different view on life. I respect life. I wouldn't take one unless I absolutely necessarily have to. I'm always looking around for other ways to do it. Like I said before, it showed me how to do a job and do it right and get it done, and to respect other people. That's about it. I don't know what else to say.
I fully understand. It goes in here. And what message would you like to send to future viewers that might watch this video?
That's a good one. I would say, if you commit to do something, do it. And I think, to me, I think the service is one of the best things to do it. I would love to see, and I know I'm going to get kicked on this, I would love to see, like, I think it's Sweden, mandatory service for everybody. So I would. I think, and when you reach a certain age and you're not going to college, or I shouldn't say not going to college. Even if you're going to college, you should serve some time in the service, whether it's reserves or full time. And I think it would be the best thing in the service, because I know kids I've tried talking them into going to service, and they're out of school, they're not doing anything, they're just laying around, doing nothing. They're working, and then they're complaining about the way that things are today. So, and don't take this wrong, but I think the newer generation, the younger generation, needs something. They're always complaining about the government, they're always complaining about the police department and stuff. They need to step back and say, hey, if it wasn't for the government, wasn't for the police department, the military and stuff, where would we be now? If it wasn't for World War II, the generation, we might be talking Japanese or German. And I know I'm going to be cut on that. Not cut, but I'm going to be, people see that, it's going to say, nah, that ain't right. But that's my feeling. Like I said, my dad was in the Navy. He was served on both sides and we were on World War II. My father-in-law was a Marine. He served on Iwo Jima. As a matter of fact, I have his field glasses at the house where he watched the flag, the first flag, being raised on Iwo Jima. And he would never talk about it. He would never go to a reunion because his unit was one of the most heavily hurt unit. People killed and wounded and everything. And they tried everything to get him to go to unit. And my brother in the Army, whenever the wall came around, a couple times, he wouldn't go. My younger brother joined the Navy, and it was during Vietnam. They sent him to become a paramedic, not a paramedic, but a medic. And he talked it over with Dad and stuff, and he finally went up to his commander and said, I can't do this, because that's where the Marine Corps were getting all their medics at the time, was from the Navy. And he figured he'd end up in Vietnam.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed that you would like to discuss?
No.
Alrighty. Well, this concludes the interview. I really do appreciate your service, and I'd like to thank you for everything you've done for us and paving the way for future generations for the military.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.